Jada,
Alicia.
thank you so much for being on the podcast once again.
You're welcome.
It's lovely to have you.
I'm happy to be here again.
I know this is your third time on the podcast.
Wow.
You are the only person who's been on the podcast 3 times.
Yay.
That is a high five.
High five. That's my favorite number, by the way.
3.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
I don't know why. I just like it.
It's a lucky number.
It's my lucky number.
Lucky number. So I wanted to have you on the podcast because you are up to something really big.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell our listeners about what you are up to?
Well, the first thing is I'm here with you in your new fancy setup. And secondly, we have a huge seminar planned in October. So about almost 3 weeks away. It's called Bloom Inclusion. That's the short name, but it's Bloom Innovative Solutions for Inclusion. And our goal is to bring people together from different industries and talk about how they can innovate toward creating better solutions for inclusion within their organizations.
Yeah. And where did the idea for Bloom Inclusion come from?
Well, so I'm a consultant. I work with different types of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be healthcare organizations, community organizations, government, corporate, education, so on and so forth. And so I noticed that people within those organizations use different vernacular, different acronyms in general. Now, when it comes to inclusion, people sometimes talk about different things, but use the same words. So you may have people in healthcare who say that they're focusing on social determinants of health, and then inclusion may come as a part of that conversation. You have acronyms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is bringing different types of people together. Inclusion is building an environment where everyone can feel like they belong. And equity is when you really look at systemically and historically how different types of people have been marginalized, right? And so how do we bring all of these people together? That was my question. And bring them together so that they're focusing on not what has happened in the past, but their focus is on solutions in an innovative way.
Which is design thinking, right?
I would say it's part of that is design thinking. Design thinking is more of an iterative process. So you start with empathizing and you end with a test.
Mm-hmm.
I would say this for me has been a design thinking process. This meaning the growth of Bloom. And so the empathizing would be for me understanding that these organizations are doing these things. They're saying different, using different terminology, and they really want to see change and action. I'm very action oriented, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in empathizing with different organizations, now comes the innovation for me, right? In the design thinking model. So when you go to the innovation piece, or ideate means you're coming up with different ideas. So when I saw that this was a problem, my big idea was, hey, let's bring all these people together. And so for the last 4 years, it's been working. So for a couple of years, Social Designs, our team kind of put together different pilots, if you will. Does this work? When people get together that are in nonprofit, in education, and government, do they clash or do they ideate? Do they clash or do they find ways to innovate more and come up with different solutions? And so now we're in that test process of design thinking, if you will. So I'm seeing that this model, it not only works, but it's inspiring for the people that come.
Yeah, so our audience may or may not be in some of those groups.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they want to come to Bloom? What are they going to get out of Bloom Inclusion?
Well, my background, I'll speak for myself, right? I'm not within any organization outside of social design.
Yeah, you're
right?
an entrepreneur.
I'm an entrepreneur, and so I'm excited because I get to learn how to be a better leader. Our focus, once again, is inclusion and innovation. So just the fact that we are asking people to be innovative and to share how they are better leaders, and those people include our panelists, those people include our speakers, and we invite people who attend to think about those questions as well. So as an individual who's not connected to an organization, my guess is that you interact with people who are not a part of organizations. My guess is that you probably want to continue to grow in your skill set, in your not just networking, but in your connections and solid, sustainable connections with people. That's what an individual not connected to an organization will get from Bloom.
Yeah, and how do you think diversity, equity, and inclusion all relate to creativity?
That's a great question. And so I'll tease apart the three because all three are different.
Right.
now they're kind of in that sandwich,
Right.
right?
Like, so everybody's like, these are the buzzwords.
Yeah,
We want to make
yeah.
sure we're diverse and we're
Yes.
including everyone. And yeah, like
Everything's equitable,
yes,
right?
yes.
So I'll just start with diversity. So to me, diversity connects to inclusion simply because when you have different types of people, right? And diverse environment means you have people from different places,
Yes.
different backgrounds, different demographics, different gender identities, different ways of thinking. And so when you involve different people and you give them space, when you give them time, when you give them an environment to ask each other questions, to share their own ideas, that's where the creativity blooms, right? Now, from an inclusive perspective, everyone feels inclusive in a different way. So the way that you feel inclusive may be different from me.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we talk about what that means for both of us and then come up with ways that we can create sustainable solutions for the entire organization? And I'll even break that down. So what's a sustainable solution for the organization, right? So a sustainable solution means that as an individual, I am efficient,
Mm-hmm.
I am cared for, I am successful, and when there is an issue, when there is conflict, I don't feel like I can't say anything.
Ooh, can I bring something up
Sure.
about you and I?
Sure.
And talk about it in the inclusive area?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Let's do
so
it.
the first time on the podcast, I wanted to pull an animal spirit card.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't comfortable, but you didn't say anything, which means that I hadn't created an environment that was inclusive enough for you to be able to yet say that you felt that way.
That's an example.
That's an example, right? So, but now you've told me. So what's changed? Like, what has become different in the environment between us? Would that be an example of inclusion?
I think asking the question is an example of how can we be more inclusive in that example.
Okay.
Right? So from my perspective, what I would give you advice to do
Yeah.
is to say, hey, we have animal spirit cards. Would you like to pull one? If you don't, it's cool.
So giving the opt out.
Yes.
Yes.
Or the opt in to do what I want to do.
Right.
So it's language is powerful, but semantics, tomato. But those are just some examples of how to think about someone else outside of you,
Mm-hmm.
and to know from my perspective, because I did do it, I also had an option to say no, and I think that's important too, because just because leaders want you to do certain things in organizations,
Mm-hmm.
just because you are in friendships or relationships and people ask you to do things, everyone has the power to say no.
Right.
You have to suffer the consequences, but we have the agency to say no, to say yes, to say maybe, to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's about understanding that everyone needs to be included and giving people those very, very specific tips in how to do
Mhm.
that.
I
Does that
love
make
it.
sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, what about creativity and equity?
Creativity and equity, yes. So equity, the definition that we use with social design, this is the shorthand, is really creating an environment, understanding that historically marginalized populations exist, right? Understanding it from a historical perspective. And equity is when you create access for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at, let's say, I'm thinking of a different system. Name any system and I'll make an example. Give me a system.
How about the police force?
Police force. Okay. So what I know to be true about police officers in
Mhm.
general is that there's a lot that is not publicized. There's a lot that is publicized. I think that's very media driven.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a history of patrolling in our country. So when you consider all of those three things,
Mhm.
and I'll add a fourth, which is I'm connected to people who are police officers, who are captains and lieutenants, and we're really good friends, and I ask tons of questions. And so I know historically in the United States that the system of patrol started with people patrolling, right? People who were enslaved Africans.
Right.
So the idea of actually patrolling people historically connects back. If we have a conversation that's connected to the realism and the actualization of that history, and knowing that 400 years later, things are a lot different. We have people whose ancestors who were enslaved who are leading police forces. So how do we juxtapose that reality, having that conversation to me leads to equity, because you look at not only how we can create a better path, but you understand kind of why we got to where we are now. You're not discounting history. So the reason why Bloom is so important is because we focus on solutions. We don't discount history. We don't discount people's experiences, but we say, yes, we acknowledge it. Now let's talk about what we need to do to move forward so that everyone thrives.
Yeah. And you are doing some really creative things in Bloom this year that I'm personally excited about experiencing. Do you want to tell everybody about the innovation stations?
Yeah, I will. So, back to the example, and when you said law enforcement, right? So, if you think about how you've been raised and how you've been raised in a very specific way, everyone has been raised in a very specific way. And then we grow up, we experience life, and then we are exposed to different things. So the way we think about and express empathy is very different. The way we think about making decisions is different. And so that's not something that we're always trained to do. We just kind of do it trial and error as humans, right?
Right.
So with that, the innovation stations, if you will, is the experiential component, one of the experiential components of Bloom, where people actually play with the idea of, how do I create more empathy? By listening to, say, a podcast and sharing their reflections, or by entering into a competition, if you will, and then working through a process of, well, how did I enter into that competition? Was I rude? Was I, did I step back? Like, what was that process and what was that culture like? We even have an innovation station where people are literally sitting on huge beanbags and just hanging out and drawing pictures. And it sounds weird, for the professional that's used to your traditional conference. But yeah, it is weird. It's different. It's a way to pull in the human aspects of everyone and who they are, how they learn, how we look at each other, how we reflect, and we're slowing down that process through the innovation station. So professionals can really step away from the practical tools and all that, and step in and out to those innovation stations.
Yes. I'm so excited about that.
I am too. I hope I get time to play too.
I hope you do too. And so I'm really excited. I mean, I hope all of the listeners of Yoke and Abundance who have the ability to go. And we should say the date. We have not yet said the date.
Yes.
It is October the 3rd.
October 3rd, Thursday, October 3rd, in Greensboro.
From what time to what time?
It's in Greensboro, North Carolina, at the Curry Convention Center from 9 o'clock to 5, and we have a reception following.
Great. And all of this information, I'm going to link to it on my website so folks can go and register. But last year I got to be the creativity cultivator.
Yes, and you are again.
I am again this year,
yes.
And I'm so excited. So that means that I get to Instagram the entire event. It means that I get to interview people who are attending the event. It means that I'll be blogging leading up to the event about the experience. We've got a couple Facebook Lives where I'll be interviewing people on the Yoke and Abundance Facebook. One will be this evening, actually.
Yeah.
I think we said 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
And then the following Tuesday at 8 o'clock. And so for those that tune in and comment and ask questions, they'll be entered into a drawing for a ticket to...
Yes, for a ticket to Bloom and a special, special, special gift that you can only get if you attend. So listen to the Facebook Live, watch the Facebook Live. We have some really, really cool people that are involved in Bloom Inclusion, from table leaders to panelists and our presenters. So it's going to be a great time.
It's going to be a fantastic time. And I'm wondering if you can share how Bloom Inclusion will help the attendees live a life of abundance.
Bloom will help attendees live a life of abundance simply because we're forcing attendees to think differently. And I think living a life of abundance doesn't mean that you're living the way that you've always lived, but you're actually walking into something that is better for you.
Jada, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being our creativity cultivator.
Thank you.